With time, the kingdoms in southern Arabia, and there were more than one, they perished, and central and northern Arabia became more important. And in the 6th century, when Muhammad was born, and he started his work in the 7th century, in the year 610, specifically, this part of Arabia had become much more important. So this is the area we will focus on. And when we talk about political life, etc., this is the area we have in mind. Politically speaking, there was no central government in Arabia, which means that there were no uniform laws. There were not any one set of laws that governed all of Arabia. There were many tribes, large and small, and they fought with each other for control of the meager resources that the desert had, resources for themselves, food, water, and for the animals. And when they had exhausted their resources, they moved to other lands and other areas where they sometimes had to fight the inhabitants, the dwellers of that area, and to occupy their sources. So politically, the land was fragmented, and no single authority could boast that it had control of the entire peninsula. Social life, and I'm skipping through a lot of detail and going through this fast because we have to focus on Muhammad's life itself. So these are just thumbnail sketches, as they say. Society was divided into free people and slaves, and this was a very strict kind of divide. Slaves were obtained in several ways. Your tribe attacked another tribe and captured members of that tribe and then made them slaves. Or there was no war as such. You simply raided another tribe and captured people and made them slaves. Third, if you had slave women, then children born of those women continued to be slaves. In other words, there was no possibility, no opportunity for those children to become free people. Once a slave, then always a slave. Marriage was practiced, of course, but there were some forms of marriage which Islam outlawed and did not approve of. One was polygamy, unlimited polygamy. A man could marry as many, polygyny strictly speaking, but we use the word polygamy. A man could marry as many women as he wanted and afford. That was his choice. And sometimes a man could marry one of the wives of his father, provided that woman was not that son's biological mother. The Quran calls it Zawaj al-Maqt. The Quran talks about it and then condemns it in the strongest possible terms. Women were adored in poetry, and they did some house chores, but they had a little say in the political and other affairs of the tribe, of the community. They served as cheerleaders in wars. They were actually taken to battles, and there they urged their husbands and brothers and sons to fight, telling them that we will sing your praises and we will belong to you if you fight and achieve victory, but if you don't, then we'll repudiate you. So they did perform this cheerleading role, and many Arab poets actually talk about this. Economic aspect, you cannot have much of an industry in the desert, but in towns, certain crafts were cultivated. Mecca, the city with which we'll be dealing, the city of Muhammad's birth, that's where he was born, was known as an important trade transit place because trade from the south and from the north, they stopped over there, and the Quraysh were the ruling tribe of that city. Quraysh was its name, were the main beneficiaries of this trade. So there was trading in some areas, and there was fruits and vegetables were grown in some oases, small towns, and some arts and crafts were practiced in cities, especially Medina, the city to which Muhammad went after about 12 years, and we'll talk about that too. Religious scene is important. There were Jews in Arabia, and we don't know for sure when and for what reasons they came to Arabia, although one commonly accepted view is that they ended up in Arabia after persecution in their own lands because there were differences, especially with Christians. And Christian heretics, as they were known at that time, also ended up in parts of Arabia, and they were active preaching Christianity also. Jews, not that much. Mostly, the people of Arabia were pagans, and by pagans we mean idol worshippers. Now, we have to remember that what we call pagans were not pagans in the sense of heathens, total infidels or strangers to all religion. That's not the sense in which we use the word pagan for those Arabs. Those Arabs regarded Abraham and Ishmael as their progenitors, biologically, also religiously. They traced their genealogy all the way back to Ishmael and then Abraham. And they believed that Abraham and Ishmael, and this is pre-Islamic tradition, Islam confirmed it. They believed that Abraham and Ishmael came to Arabia and they settled in the city of Mecca, where they built a sanctuary known as the Kaaba. We'll talk about that too. And the Kaaba became the most important shrine, house of worship in all of Arabia. And everyone agreed that Abraham was a monotheist, and that when he built the Kaaba, the sanctuary, he dedicated that sanctuary to worship of the one God. But with time, that monotheism was replaced with polytheism, and the custodians of the Kaaba in Muhammad's time, the tribe Quraysh, had put a large number of gods and goddesses, deities, images, and statues inside the Kaaba. So from monotheism to polytheism. This is important to keep in mind because it has to do with the essential mission of Muhammad. Keep the Kaaba in mind. We do not know much of intellectual activities in pre-Islamic Arabia. There were some reflections, isolated and not part of a coherent philosophical scheme. For example, the poets spoke, and the poets represented the intellectual aspect of Arabian society.